This DVD was originally produced as a video over 7 years ago. It was shown at the Far Rockaway-Five Towns community-wide siyum of Masechtas Eruvin during the last Daf Yomi cycle. Rabbi Moshe Stein, Rav HaMachshir of the Far Rockaway-Lawrence Eruv, and an expert on the laws of Eruvin, explained the halachas of Eruvin and described the components of the local Eruv on the original video. Tragically, Rabbi Stein was taken from us on Chavches Shvat Tavshin Samach Dalid, February 20th, 2004. May his words of Torah be a schus le'ilui nishmaso.
Now the pasuk says in Parshas Vayakel, "Vaytzav Moshe vayaviru kol b'machane leimor ish ve'isha al yasu oid melacha letrumas hakodesh vayikole ha'om mehavi." After the binyan hamishkan, Moshe Rabbeinu was mitzaveh the Yidden to stop bringing the nedavos which were necessary for the Mishkan. The Gemara in Shabbos in Perek HaZoyrek learns that this happened on Shabbos, and from here we know that there is a melacha of Hoitzah. In addition to the melacha of Hoitzah, there are other melachas. There's a melacha of Havara Daliramis B'Rishus Harabim, and there's a melacha of Hazoyrek Daliramis B'Rishus Harabim, or Hazoyrek B'Rishus Hayochid to Rishus Harabim, or vice versa. All those melachas either we learn from Psukim or from a halachim Moshe Misinai. The Gemara in Shabbos in Daf Vav explains what is the different reshuyos in Shabbos, so that the Brisa says Tanu Rabbanon Daled reshuyos leShabbos Rishus Hayochid uRishus Harabim v'Charmelis uMokum Petur. The Gemara explains what is a Rabim, and the Gemara says Ratle or Platya Gedoyla, a big street or a big market, uMavuos HaMefuloshin Zohi Rishus Harabim. The Gemara ends that if somebody carries from a Rishus Harabim to a Rishus Hayochid, B'shoigek chayev chatos. If he does this b'shoigek, he has to bring a korban chatos. B'meizit onush koires. If he does it b'meizit, he's chayev koires. V'niskal, or he gets skila if that's done be'edim an hasra. The Gemara in Hazoyrek explains that there are other requirements for a Rishus Harabim. We know that for the building of the Mishkan, kroshim had to be carried. Those kroshim were carried in agolas, in wagons, and they took up a space of 16 amos. The Gemara learns from there that a property of a Rishus Harabim is that it has to be a width of a minimum of 16 amos. In addition to that, there is Rashi Shita in Eruvin Daf Vav that a Rishus Harabim requires 600,000 people to frequent it, so that it should be considered a Rishus Harabim. Other Rishonim, the Rambam, for example, learned that the requirement of Shishim Riboy is not there. The Shulchan Aruch in Siman Shin Samech Dalet explains that a Rishus Harabim, in order to be matred for carrying purposes on Shabbos, it requires the losses, it requires gates. There are those that say that those gates have to be closed every night, and there are those that say there has to be a possibility that they be closed at night. The Mishnah Brura in Siman Shin Samech Dalet Siv Cotton Ches explains that being that the Mechaber in Siman Shin Mem Hey brings the Das or Rambam as a stam and the Das Rashi as a Yeshoimrim, the Mechaber means to paskin like the Rambam and not like Rashi. So therefore, the Mishnah Brura ends that even though we cannot be moiche to those that are mekel to use an Eruv which is made al yedei tzuras ha-pesach, a Baal Nefesh yachmir al atzmoi, a Baal Nefesh, somebody who's meticulous in the performance of mitzvahs, shelo letaltel al yedei tzuras ha-pesach, that he should not carry through a tzuras ha-pesach. The other Rishus, a Carmelis is not a Rishus Harabim because it's missing some of its components. According to Rashi, if it does not have 600,000 people, then that is a Carmelis. According to the Rambam and the other Rishonim, it may not be a Carmelis if it's not 16. It may not be a Carmelis if it's not mefulish, if it's not open from one gate of the city to the other gate. For example, a dead-end street could not possibly be a Rishus Harabim. As we mentioned before in Siman Shin Samech Dalet, a Rishus Harabim can only be nitar al yedei mechitzas and losses. A carmelis, however, being that midioraisa, a carmelis has no iser of carrying, you can carry from a Rishus Hayochid to a carmelis or vice versa, or you can carry daleramos in a carmelis. Chazal, however, due to the similarities between a carmelis and a Rishus Harabim, made a gzeira not to carry in a carmelis unless it's surrounded by a minimum of a tzuras hapesach. In order to understand if Far Rockaway and Lawrence are considered a Rishus Harabim or a Carmelis, I would like to describe the Eruv. On the northern side of the Eruv borders with the Long Island Railroad. Going west towards eventually Beach 20th Street, and then we go south till we get to Sigurd Boulevard, which follows eventually to the 878, following Rockhole Road, and then eventually Harbor View South, where we use the bulkhead as mechitzas for the Eruv. Then we go across Meadow Lane to the eastern side of the Eruv, which is Meadow Lane, going to Rockaway Boulevard. Now, if you pay attention to the map, you will see that in the center of the map, highlighted in green, is the 878, or what's known as the Nassau Expressway. The Nassau Expressway, as everybody knows, is at least Tes Zayin Amud wide, but according to Rashi, you require 600,000 people, which we know do not frequent the 878. In order to explain to you why it is that we are able to make a Far Rockaway Lawrence Eruv, I would have to explain to you the Shita of the Beis Ephraim and the Chazon Ish. The Beis Ephraim and the Chazon Ish holds, the Chazon Ish, by the way, is in Simon Kuf Zayin, Seif, Cotton Hay, and it's also brought in the Chuvas Achiezer, in Chelek Dalet, where the Achiezer had a big shaila about the Eruv in Paris, and he consulted with the Chazon Ish about the possibility of making an Eruv in Paris, and they came to the conclusion that they could by using the Shita of the Beis Ephraim. They have an area enclosed by mechitzas. We are mainly concerned with the northern mechitza, which is 100 amos in width. Now, as you could see, written in green ink is the gaps in the mechitza. One gap is 18 amos, another gap is 15 amos, and another gap is 11 amos. That's just an example. The numbers could change. The closed part of the mechitza, as you can see, is 19, 16, 13, and 6 amos. If you add together all the gaps which are open in this mechitza, I believe that it adds to 44 amos. The places which are closed add up to 54 amos. Now, the Chazon Ish says Shita is that whenever you have oimet meruba ala parutz, meaning that there are more closed areas than there are open areas, the gaps which are open do not answer the area for carrying on Shabbos, except mi gezeiras derabanan. The sheet of the Chazon Ish is that we can enclose those pirtzas of yoiser me'eser al yedei a tzuras hapesach. Now, if we go back to the Far Rockaway Lawrence Eruv, I could show you that the great majority of the enclosure of the Eruv of Far Rockaway and Lawrence are solid mechitzas and not tzuras hapesach, rendering the area of the Far Rockaway Lawrence Eruv into a Rishus HaYochid midoraisa according to the Chazon Ish, and that is what we are soimechan to be able to use that Eruv. Now, it's important to know that not everybody is in agreement with this Chazon Ish, so that many Gedolim disagreed with him. The most famous one being the Mishkenos Yankov in the Chuvas, who disagreed with the Beis Ephraim in many, many Chuvas, and held that a Pirza Yosem Me'eser is an Isa de Oraisa, and therefore you cannot be mater the area al yedei tzuras HaPesach. And Rabbaron Kotre Zatzal in his Chuvas Mishnas Rabbaron agrees with the Mishkenos Yankov that an area which has a pirza of Yosem Me'eser requires mechitzas and cannot be niter al yedei tzuras HaPesach. If we look at the map, we could see highlighted in red all places which are solid mechitzas rather than a tzuras HaPesach. As you follow through, you can clearly see that the mechitzas are the great majority of the Far Rockaway Lawrence Eruv. A tzuras HaPesach is the great minority. Therefore, the Far Rockaway Lawrence becomes a Rishus HaYochid according to the Shita of the Chazon Ish, and therefore we are allowed to enclose the rest of the places where we do not have mechitzas with a tzuras HaPesach. The Gemara in the second parak in Eruvin explains that in addition to the Isser of carrying in a Rishus HaRabim or in a Carmelis, in order to enclose an area for the purpose of carrying on Shabbos, it has to be hukaf ledira. What that means is that the mechitzas of the area had to be put up for living purposes rather than from shmira purposes. For example, if somebody would have a farm planted with zroim, with wheat, and he would enclose that in a fence so that people do not come and trample on his wheat, that would not be considered hukaf ledira, and you would not be able to carry there on Shabbos. In Far Rockaway and Lawrence, we have many places which are not hukaf ledira by definition. For example, at the end of Sigurd Boulevard and by Beach 9th Street, there is a big area of overgrown koitzim and trees and water and mud, which is not livable, rendering that area no hukaf ledira. That area is much more than Beis Hosayim. There is another such area west of the 878. In the Sutton Park area, there is a lake. That lake, from our investigation, the water there is not drinkable, nor is it usable for washing clothing, making that area, according to the Shulchan Aruch, also not hukaf ledira. There is a shita of the Dvar Shmuel and the Chacham Tzvi, which the Bia Halacha brings, that if you have a city that's surrounded by a wall, such a zroim will not be mevatel the hekev ledira, being that the dira of a city is so strong that zroim could not possibly be mevatel it. However, that shita of the Dvar Shmuel and the Chacham Tzvi, first of all, the Chacham Tzvi himself says that it's only b'shas hadchak godel. What does that mean, shas hadchak godel? So I would like to explain that the style of living in Europe is not the same style as that which we have here in America. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, in his tshuva about the Eruv in Detroit, at first says, what is the purpose and what is the need of an Eruv in America? He states as follows: everybody in America has refrigerators and has water in their houses and bathrooms in their houses, so that they don't have to have an Eruv in order to draw water or to bring food from the outside, which in Europe, in most places, they did not have. So there was a big shas hadchak. It was not possible to live without an Eruv. Being that in America there is not such a big shas hadchak, we decided in Far Rockaway-Lawrence not to include any karfeifas which are not hukaf ledira, and we exclude them from the Eruv. In addition to the fact that it's not a shas hadchak godel, the shita of the Dvar Shmuel may not apply in Far Rockaway, being that the Dvar Shmuel explicitly states that we're talking in a case where it was hukaf ledira. First, the houses and the homes were there, and somebody went ahead and planted zroim. But to go ahead and make an eruv around a zroim, that you cannot do. And we know that the zroim in Far Rockaway were there probably from Maaseh Bereshis before any of the homes were here, making the shita of the Dvar Shmuel not applicable in Far Rockaway. In addition to that, there is a Hagoy's Oshri that states that just the opposite, that if the zroim are there now, and then we make the hekev ledira afterwards, we are allowed to do that. However, again, that's questionable in Far Rockaway for the Hagoy's Oshri. The way the Divri Malkiel explains it is based on the fact that if I own zroim, I'm entitled to destroy them and put a house there instead of zroim. So therefore, my hekev ledira is valid. The case of Far Rockaway is such that they're wetlands protected by the federal government. I could not build there even if I wanted to, so it's highly questionable whether we could use the sheet of the Hagoy's Oshri and the Divri Malkiel. So in order not to have that shaila, we took out all those karfeifas. The Mishnah at the beginning of the 6th parak in Eruvim states as follows: Hadar im ha'akum bechotzer o im misha eino moide be'eruv. If somebody lives with a goy or with somebody who does not abide by the dinim of Eruvin, he requires to rent the reshus from him. Now, how do we do that bizman hazeh in Far Rockaway and Lawrence? It is a real big problem, for there are many goyim living in Far Rockaway and Lawrence, and there's also many Jewish people that